Welcome to the Flutter CI/CD course over here. And if you want to learn some of the more advanced concept in the Flutter CI/CD, make sure to check out my course in my website where we will cover all of the topic related to the Flutter CI/CD with the code magic as well as the GitHub action. So let's go and see what are the topics that we will be covering over here. Let's scroll down. The first thing that we are going to cover is the continuous integration over here, and we will also cover the continuous delivery. Similarly, we will have the continuous deployment over here, and we'll also make use of the code magic YAML file, and we'll also cover the server code push, and then we also have the GitHub action over here. So whole bunch of the topics that we are going to cover with the Flutter CI/CD over here, and I hope you will enjoy this particular course as well as the topics that we have covered over here. I hope to see you. Till then, have a great day. Okay, so introduce me yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Karan and I am a pre-final year student at college in Chennai. I have a year of Flutter experience with freelance projects and internship. And in some of my internships, I made those apps for the club. In freelance projects, I made some of my personal projects and college projects, some in-house projects related to car rental projects and food delivery applications with semi-backends. So, this is
okay. That's good to know. So since you don't have any of the like the corporate experience, since you are still in the university level, I'll start with some of the basic questions first of all.
Yeah.
So tell me something about the Flutter. So what is Flutter actually?
So Flutter is a framework. That's not exactly a language. Flutter is a framework for mobile development purposes that uses Dart as a language because it's an object-oriented language to keep it as an environment and work with it to make mobile applications. And it's very helpful for the UI part and also the business logic. That's right.
Okay, good. So, tell me something about the widgets. What is actually a widget?
Yeah, anything inside, like most of the things in Flutter are widgets. Basically any kind of function or widget tree that is listening into any changes and reflecting any changes to the UI in any kind, maybe text, maybe image, video, or whatever animation it is, are called the widgets. They take something as input and they then define it to the UI, reflect it to the UI on the app.
Okay, that's good.
They could be called like very basic building block kind of for Flutter because almost everything is a widget on Flutter.
Yeah. So you have used both the stateful and then the stateless widget, right?
Yeah, both of them.
So what's the difference between both of these?
So the stateless widget is for something when you use kind of static data. When you are just reflecting some definite kind of data on your app to the screen where there is maybe no input or no changes. Then you use stateless widget when there is basically no state is changing. Whereas when you are using stateful widget, when you are dealing with dynamic data, there is streams of data coming, there is input that the user is giving, based on that the data is changing or functions are getting triggered, there we use stateful widget.
Okay.
Real time changes.
Okay.
That's all.
So once you use the Flutter, there is a lot of the context comes, right? Build context is there. So can you explain me about the build context?
The build what?
Build context.
Function.
Build context. There is a build context, right? If you see
the build context. Okay, yeah. Whenever you start the project or whenever we start that UI or the logic part, there is a build context at the starting. So whenever an app initiates, it forms a build tree, a widget tree. That defines how the features of the app are going to render in the app. That build context, we have build context triggers that widget tree based on which your widgets and everything is gonna render on your app. That's how it works. So it is used at the starting of that part, the build context and context. Then after that you write your scaffold part.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just now we talked about the stateful widget, and stateful widget we have the option for the set state, right? So
Yeah.
what does the set state actually do?
That state is used to manage the state. For example, you want a refresh after some kind of function when it is triggered, or you want a rebuild after any input from the user. This that state is used, but because it rebuilds the whole UI, it is a kind of complex, and you need to put it like for every widget you need to put a set state. That's why it's complex. Complex state management tool. It's the default on the product.
Okay. So once you call the set state, what actually happens? Do you know what it actually happens?
Yeah. Once we call a set state, so in set state we just we define a function inside the set state. When that function is triggered, whatever the function is doing, it rebuilds the UI of the app, and with the UI, the app the data gets refreshed. For example, we are fetching some kind of data from the API. We use set state. The data is fetched again after the refresh, and that's how it helps us with the real time reflection of the data in our app.
Okay, that's good.
So basically, it changed the state of that.
Do you know internally like how the set state triggers the build of the rebuild of the widgets?
Set state, okay, so the set state is called in that set state a function is called based on that function, or if you can use it without function also. It rebuilds the UI, forms a widget tree. Then when the widget tree is formed, according to that widget tree, your widgets and whatever you're using for the app are rebuilt according to the tree, and they are then rendered on your app to reflect it to the UI.
So how does the Flutter knows that this particular widgets need to be rebuilt?
In set state, you can externally mention for what kind of function you want to rebuild. For example, you don't want to rebuild the whole app. You want to refresh, or you want, for example, if you're using API, you just want to fetch the data from the API again. You don't want to disturb the other part of that. You can put a set state in that part, in that API part. So it will just refresh the data with what is being fetched from that server, and it won't disturb the other part of that, and also preserving the complexity of that.
Okay. So do you know like about the dirty widgets, like how the Flutter creates or triggers marks the widgets to be dirty? Have you ever heard about it?
No, I don't remember much about the dirty widgets. Maybe what I think of is maybe the dirty widgets are the ones which like don't rebuild frequently. Don't get rebuilt frequently when you put the set state, or don't get render exactly in the way you need. So that's what I think. I thought about it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So let's talk about the keys in the Flutter. So what do you think? What is the keys in the Flutter?
So keys in Flutter are used to map what kind of data we are accepting to where it should be stored. Any kind of widget can be given a key to also, for this part, for the mapping part, and also for the state preserving part, to know how the state of that particular widget that we are using is being changed. There is a global key which is used, for example, when we use the forms in the text fields, where we use the global key there to listen to any kind of state change that is happening there, any kind of data which is being given there by the user. For that purpose, key works. So yeah, that's all for the rebuilding part basically.
Can you name some type of the keys that the Flutter has?
the one I know is the global key which is used in the form part, like when you are designing a form or a text field part, which you define in the form and it listens to the state changes, whatever is happening in the form, and according to that, it rebuilds the app. I don't have worked much upon the keys, so yeah, I know this one because I was working on forms.
Okay. So there are other keys as well, right? But you talked about the global key using with your form. So why do we use a global key with the form? Or what is the use case of having a global key using with the form and not using any other kind of the keys with the form? Because there are other keys as well that you can use, right? So why do we use a global key with the form actually?
Global key is a different from other keys because it uniquely identifies that in what part of the widget tree should that widget be put to render. That's why it is used in the form because form has a unique kind of data from any user that we are accepting. So we need to put a global key into the form so that it maps to what the user is giving input and where should it be kept, and also take the state changes, put it in the widget tree in the way we want to render it for the app when the app is rebuilt. That's how like the global key works because it keeps the thing unique and it's in the way. Yeah.
Okay. So once you are creating a global key, what is the good or what you think a best practice for creating this particular global key? So where
creating a global
yeah, so where should we actually create the global key? Do we put inside the build method, or should be inside, should it be in the class instance? So how should we actually create the or define the global key?
Global key can be like it is defined inside the scaffold part within a form state. So you select the global key inside the form. You select that state of the scaffold state of the form state, and there you define the global key because you are using that for that particular widget. And yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah, then you define it inside the scaffold where the form will be.
Now, once you create an instance, let's say you want to create an instance of the global key. First, you need to create the instance or the object of that particular, right? Instance.
Yeah.
So, where do you create it? So, is it inside the build method you create, or should it be in the
outside the build method, where, for example, the way we initialize any of the variables or widgets, the same way we initialize a variable for that. So we can just put like whatever you call it, final, and then their global key, the form state, the name of the global key we want, and then after that the global key and the form state you can put. And then that global key is called wherever you are using that global key inside your build context, the UI part.
So why we don't create it inside the build method? So why do you think we don't create it inside the build method? So we can actually create it inside, right? So we can also define a variable inside the build method, but why we don't create it inside the build method?
We don't create inside global key inside the build method. I think it's because we don't want a limit every time the global key is called. It's listening to the changes, it's getting the input from the user, but we don't want every time the user is putting data, the form to be refreshed. That's why we are not putting it inside the build method, but yes, we are initializing it and calling it in the widget when we are using it. That's the reason.
Okay. In the stateful widget, we also have some of the other methods like the init method, right? The sports.
Yeah, the init method.
The dependency change. So can you explain me a bit about these three methods that it comes with the stateful widget?
So one of them is init state. So init state manages whatever data what kind of data what function we want to render when the app is initially being example, you're using an API, you put that method to fetch the API in that init function. So as soon as your app builds, it will fetch all the information from the API and show it on your app. So one of the functions is the init part, and the build context is used to put the inside the build context. We use the set state part. It's set state to listen for the any state changes, and then it will build the next exact thing, the exact widget that we are using. And the other function is some dependency function, some kind of
The dependency change, right?
change. Yeah, that function that listens to any dependency change or any dependency or state change, and it reflects it accordingly to the state, to the UI.
What about the dispose?
Dispose function is when we are done with any kind of state and we don't want the rebuild for that particular state or widget. We just dispose the screen so that it doesn't increase the complexity of the app to get an optimized performance.
So when do you think that dispose method is called?
When is the dispose method called?
Yeah.
For example, when we once build, or if we want a rebuild, we can go for rebuild. Then after, if we, for example, end the life cycle of rebuilding any particular widget for the app, there we can use dispose. And after that, we are not going to rebuild that particular widget or whatever part we are rebuilding. That's how dispose functions. That's when dispose function is used.
Okay, so the init method, do you think once you rebuild or once you call the set state inside the build method, does it call the init method again?
Now, init method is called once because it has to be called only when the app is building for the first time. So when the app is building for the first time, all the things that you need to show on the app, all the fetching part, all that part which you want to reflect it to the UI is put under that init state part. And then if you want the state change under the build context, you can use that state method. In that, just write your function, whatever you wanna rebuild, and then that's how it works. Init function, init state is used just for the first time, just once when the app is being built for the first time.
Okay. So let's say you have a two-screen app, and from the screen A and then the screen B, and let's say you navigate from the screen A to the screen B, and let's say you click on the back button to navigate back to the screen A. So what do you think? Which are the methods that get triggered once you click the back button? Let's say in the app bar you have the back button, right? So let's say you press the back button, and what do you think? Which method is called from the lifecycle?
If you're going back from the screen to the screen one again.
Yes, so if you are going back from the screen B to the screen A, and you press the let's say a back button to navigate back to the screen A, so which method do you think from the lifecycle is called?
Which method is called? I think if there is any set state included in that will be called. But which method from the lifecycle will be called? I don't know about the exact method which will be called to it. But the set state or any kind of functions which are being triggered in its way will be called again when that page is being rebuilt. That the page screen one is being rebuilt and you press the back button, those methods will be called. For example, the screen one is put in the init state. It will fetch again the all data or whatever function is there in the init state of that page.
Okay, so let's talk about the inheritance widget. Have you ever heard or have you ever used about the inherited widget?
I'm not practically used it, but I know some of the things. Inheritance widget is when you can create an instance of it and you can use directly the instance because the object is already created in the parent class. So sometimes we use a widget to listen to some kind of list that we have externally added. We use widget dot something dot something. There we are using a kind of inherited widget, so that because the an instance is already saved in the parent class, we just use this instead of the instance of the child class. That's called inheritance.
So what do you think? What do you think is like once you call the context dot off, right? So we see a lot of using context dot off, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you think? What kind of widget is that context dot off?
What kind of widget?
Yeah.
Context
What kind of
dot off.
actual the in the background? What kind of the widget is actually the context dot off? So if you like you want to use a theme inside your, let's say, down the widget tree in somewhere in the child, you basically call context dot off, right? And you want to load the theme or you want to load the language. So have you ever used that one?
The context or that of is used to know the location of a widget in a widget tree. Like when that widget will be gonna render. For example, we use it with like the path providers and these providers. We use it. The idea is it can be called a kind of inherited widget also, because it does uses the instances of the object created by the class created by the parent class. So yeah, we use it. Yeah, the basic use is to know the location of a widget in a widget tree and to get data through it.
So let's say if you have a parent widget A, and let's say you have a widget, let's say you have a widget B, C, D, E, F, right? So you have a many child widget that is attached to the parent. And let's say from the bottom of your widget tree you have the widget, let's say F, and it needs to access the data from the widget A, right? So how do you access that particular data from the widget? Let's say from widget F, you have to go back to your parent widget, which is of the widget A. So how do you access it?
So an instance is already created. If there is a parent widget, there are many child widgets, and if we want to use the one of the instances from the parent widget through the child, we will just mention like widget dot and then the class of the that parent class, and then exactly what we are trying to use through an inherited method. So instance is created, and then through that instance, that widget in the parent class is accessed, and then we use it in Google.
So how do you pass the data from the parent to the child? Or let's say how the child is going to access the data that is in the parent. Let's say you store some state in the parent, let's say or let's say a widget A that needs to be accessed in the widget F.
So A is the parent widget.
Yeah. So F is the child. So from the F you have to go up, right? F, then you have to go to E. Or how does it can access the data that is in the widget A? So how you are going to pass in, or how you are going to access it?
It can pass down the data to the widget tree using that off context method that you were asking for. So dot context, that inherited widget dot off context, that method is used to pass down the data through the widget tree. So in the top there will be parent classes, then another child which is again a parent, then another child. So we will go back passing the data through the widget tree, and that's how it will access and render the data.
So to use the context dot off, right? So let's say you want to access the data from the child object using the context dot off. So what do you think that we need to do? So what kind of the widgets that we need to create?
Child class wants to access data from the parent class.
So that's why you mentioned you will access using the context dot off, right? And to use that context dot off, so what you have to do? So what you are going to use? So if you are going to, are you going to use the inherited widget? Are you going to create the inherited widget, or
We can, yeah, that through that context dot function, that's an inherited widget function. Through that, we can pass down the data. So that you were asking for how the data will be passed. We can pass down the data to the whatever constructors we are using. We will use that function, and then that data will be passed upwards towards the tree, like from the child to the parent, then again to the another parent which is present there, and that's how like multiple child widgets can access the data from the parent class.
Okay, so let's talk about the list. List. Everybody use the list, right? So list is the most used things in the application.
No, sure, yeah.
So what is the difference between the you have the list view and you also have the list view dot builder and you have a lot of the list view dot, right? So we basically use the list view dot builder. So why do we think we use the list view dot builder instead of just using the list view directly?
So the list view is used basically when both of them can be used for an complex app, but list view is basically usually used when you have a very static data which is also a thing. But when you are listening to some kind of data from somewhere and you want to just render a particular amount of data in your app, to just decrease the complexity of the app to keep it optimized, we use list view dot builder. That's what lazy loading. So only that part of the which is called the list will be rendered, which is being fetched from the data, so that it like barely moves on with the complexity. So builder will keep on listening to the data and reflecting on the app how much it is available, and that the normal list view will just render the whole part, even if it's not, even if we don't want that whole part of the data. So it will increase the complexity of the app.
Okay. So in the Flutter, once we create the let's say you create one widget, in the background it actually creates the tree for it, right? So you have the widget tree, you have the element tree, and you also have the render tree. So can you explain me the concept behind each of these three trees that we have? Widget tree, element tree, and render object tree.
For now, I just know about this widget tree because I have worked upon only this. What the widget tree does is basically it gives a tree form on the basis of how which tells how the things, the widgets inside your app will be rendered once your app initiates for the first time. It tells, and the other group I didn't work with them, so yeah, I don't know much about them. The widget trees for that mainly.
Okay. Have you ever used a custom painter? Or do you know what?
Custom paint.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I use custom paint. No.
Okay. Let's talk about the memory leak. So, what do you think that can cause the memory? Or explain me what is actually a memory leak first.
Memory leak is basically when your when your app goes out of memory and it releases or leaks some kind of data which is no longer needed by the app. It leaks the data or whatever resource that is. That's called a memory leak to the app. So there are multiple methods used to prevent it so that the data is still retained in the app. So that's the memory leak part. The theoretical part. How it happens.
Okay, so just now we talk about the memory leak, and let's talk about the garbage collector. So, what do you know about the garbage collector?
Garbage collector.
Yeah. Have you ever heard about the garbage collector?
No, yeah, garbage collector is a new term for me. I have not heard about it yet.
Okay.
But garbage collector, according to me, would be something that can catch whatever data which is being received on our week to collect it so that the data is retained. It could be one of the preventions or one of the cures of the memory. What I understand from the term, I don't know what you mean.
Okay. Can you explain me about the compiler? What is actually a compiler?
So compiler is what compiler is the program that converts the code of your language into a code that the system understands so that the code can be worked upon to the system and that it gives the output accordingly. So it goes through multiple processes through the inside the compiler which works the intermediate processes and the syntax and those analyzers and then creates the makes the processing happen and then gives back the output for you.
Okay, that's good. Do you know about what is the compiler that actually Flutter use?
Compiler
How does the Flutter compile the code, or what compiler does the Flutter actually use to do the compilation of its Flutter or the dot code back to the native code, which is native for can be for iOS, Android, right? So the Mac, Windows, it generates a native code at the end, right? So which compiler does it actually use?
I just read about it that one of the compilers, I think it's a method, it's called JIT method which is used by the Flutter, which uses like native runtime compilation. Well, it's used by the Dart, using runtime compilation to run all its code, do the processing part and give the output accordingly because also JIT process I think provides that hot reload and hot restart part. That's why it is used in Flutter.
So
Yeah.
So you mean that the Flutter use the JIT, right? Just-in-time compiler.
Yeah, just in time. Yeah.
Do you think for the production or the release build of the app, does it use the JIT or it use the other compiler?
I don't yeah, I don't know the name of the exact compiler that is used for the production level apps, but this is not the one which is used for production level apps because it has many cons for that. But for production level app, entire code of whatever we are making from that kind of different machines is put at one is installed in a single device that it is compiled and then yeah, that's how it works to give the output. But it's not used, GIT is not used for production level. That compiler is another, I don't remember the name.
Yeah. So it's a JIT and then the AOT, right? Ahead of time and just-in-time compiler.
Yeah.
AOT
Yeah,
for the release script. So why it has to separate a two compiler just to work with the Flutter? Why do you think it used the JIT in the debug build?
So in the debug build, usually what happens is sometimes when we are working on an app on the starting stages, we build or write the code at different machines at different platforms, different release versions. So what happens in then we are executing the code, compiling the code separately. But once we enter the production level compiling, there what we have to do is compile the whole code of all the versions and all the languages and whatever it is in the same machine, install it there, and then compile it because we have to release it as a one. So that's what that AOT does, which is not provided by the JIT compiler.
Okay. So what about the hot reload and hot restart? So there is a hot reload and hot restart in the Flutter, right? So can you explain me about this too?
Hot reload is done for a particular widget or a particular rebuild call. Whereas hot restart rebuilds your whole app again from the debug part, and then again you have to start, and then again you start the debug session for the whole app. So if sometimes we don't want to rebuild the whole app, we will just put our account for the reload. And if there is some package error, some platform exception or something from that, we will do a hot restart that will be available.
Okay. So I think that's on the Flutter framework side. So let's move on to the Dart. That itself. So explain what is a class.
Class is a structure that keeps all the objects and its the attributes that manages the object and the execution all its instances so that it can be used in the code anywhere the way we want. So the class is defined, objects define the class, and they are the instance of the class, and class maintain the structure by keeping all the objects and their attributes in it.
Okay, so what is in the Dart we have the let variable, right? So what is the use case or when do we use the let variable or the let keyword?
Let variable is basically, first of all, it is used when either we are getting some kind of data which is going to take time to fetch, and second, when a kind of data on to which we want to mark it as non-relevant. So there are two things. Sometimes we are using final, sometimes we are using late. That's the difference. When we are using late, we will be marking it as non-nullable so that we can and also that we can initialize it later and then assign the value, then use it. That's also the late part.
So what about the final keyword?
Final is used when, for example, we are working with any kind of API. So when we are working with that async program, async function, we are trying to fetch data from the API server. We will put the initializing using the final keyword because we have to await for the process and then we are getting the data. So it is initialized afterwards. Then it is fetching data. It takes some time the data takes some time to get fetched and then reflected. That's why when the final is used. So
can the once you assign the value to the final variable, it allows to be changed?
The final word, yeah, can you repeat it?
Can you reassign the value to the final variable?
No, according to me, no. I have not changed it much yet. But you can't change the value of the final one because you are using it afterwards. That's why, and it takes some time to get data. What is initialized before. That's why we can change it.
So how do we create the abstract class in the Dart?
How do we create an abstract class? We can just directly define it as an abstract and just connect it to the parent class and define an abstract class, and through that class we can call the main class that we want to call.
No, I mean how you are going to create, how do you create, how do you define? Let's say you create a class animal, you say class animal, right? So class space animal is a animal class, and let's say
animal class.
If you want to create an animal as abstract class, how do you create it?
So we implement it as an abstract class. We just put an first of all we put the abstract keyword in before that that class, so it will become the abstract class animal. Now it becomes an abstract class. And now you can't then you have to use it through a regular method. So in that class you will add some methods that will be used that you can use inside that build function to call them and use it in the UI. Like you cannot directly use it to a subclass or by creating an object.
Okay.
That's how the abstract class is.
So can the abstract class be instantiated?
Instantiated. Like what do you mean?
Can you create an instance? Can you create an instance of the abstract class?
No, we can't create an instance of the class. What we can do is we can create a subclass. That subclass can be called to trigger this class. That's how that.
What about the interface? What is an interface? How do we create an interface in the Dart?
Creating an interface in the Dart.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I know about that. Like processing, maybe I know, but not by the terms.
What is the difference between the abstract class and the interface?
Interface class is a normal class that can be interface which is used implemented. Their interface classes are implemented using those abstract classes. Since those classes, these abstract classes can't be used directly in our code or wherever we want, we use some kind of subclasses or some classes so that we can use the abstract class. Those are called as interface classes, so that we can use the interface classes to them.
So how do you use the interface? Let's say you define a Dart interface, and how you are going to use that particular interface. Have you ever used a keyword like extend and implement?
Yeah, the extend keyword is used whenever we want to one extend is used in one of our in a stateless and stateful widget. So it extends that class, and then that class is used in our code.
So what do you think the extend is? Once you call the extend, is it using the abstract class, or is it using the interface?
It is using the interface class. So we use the extend keyword because we cannot directly use the abstract class. We extend it, then use it to the interface class in the code or function wherever we want to use it.
What about the implement? Let's say class car implement some class, right? Class A. Let's say class A implement B. So what does the implement actually mean? When do you use the implement keyword?
Class. So the car implement C, and then another class is again implemented to some other class.
No, I mean, let's say you have a class car and it implements A. So what does the implement A mean? Why don't you use extend and use the implement here?
So when we say the car implements a class A, that means that a car will be using some of the method of the class A using that interface method, because the class A cannot directly be called. So the car is implementing the methods of the class A. For example, because the class A would be most probably an abstract class, we define for example, another function, a car called, maybe we can define a class, a car, that will be using the functions of the abstract class. For example, there is a class A, we have a function inside that, and we are creating a class which extends the abstract class A. Then we can use that function of the abstract class using the car code.
Okay, so just now you talk about the OOP, or the object-oriented programming. Can you give me the what are the different the 4 pillars of the object-oriented programming?
The 4 basic ones are this encapsulation, polymorphism, abstraction, and inheritance, where each one has different use. One of them is, for example, encapsulate. One is basically encapsulating. Like if you don't want a particular part, a particular logic to be shown, we just cover it. We don't show it to the UI. Inheritance is basically using the for if the parent class if the child class is using the parent class code or overriding it or whatever it's doing, it's called uh, inheritance. For example, being basically inheriting properties from the parent class. And polymorphism is creating one instance or one interface and then using it in multiple ways.
So can you give me some example of polymorphism?
For example, we may create a class. For example, we can create a car class. Inside, we add a method. For example, a model method, or I should say a method called movie. Then we can also extend that class and use that method in a different way also. So we will try to access that method to the class and then use it in our code in 2 or 3 different ways. That's how polymorphism works. So we are initializing it once and implementation in our use in different ways.
So what keyword is actually used for that particular functionality? Do you know what is the keyword?
For polymorphism?
Yeah. In
I don't think there is an exact, I don't remember the exact keyword, but we just use the extend part. So one class is extending the other class to use it polymorphism part. Once we extend the parent class, then we can use its method again to that object class, and then we can use it to our tool. So we use that. Yeah.
So in the Flutter, we have the stateful widgets that extends the stateful, right? Stateful widget. So once you extend it, then so what is the polymorphism? Is there a polymorphism there? So what do you think then?
Yeah, extends happen when we want to use this polymorphism part. For example, that basic widget non-widget extends the stateful widget. So we are using it in different ways. That's why we say that it's extending the stateful part, that stateful widget.
So what is the example there? Like let's say you extend the stateful widgets, and how actually is the polymorphism implemented there? Just by extending is not extending is just you are inheriting, right? So but the polymorphism is not the inheritance.
Yeah, for there are two different things. Once we are extending a class, we are inheriting a class through another class. We can use its method, which is already initialized in different ways.
So that is inheritance, right? So that is inheritance. So you can use the parent
from method. Inheritance, you are accessing that class, and by polymorphism, you are using its method in different ways. So you are initializing one, and using those methods in different ways. That's polymorphism.
So what is the example of that one in the let's say stateful widget?
Like we have different methods. If we extend the stateful class, then we can use its method in different ways. Like for example, another is set state. We can use set state for different things. We can use that in its state for different things. The dependency method for a function for different things. That's how the polymorphism works.
Okay. So what about the abstraction?
Abstraction is basically it's also kind of hiding complex things. It is different from encapsulation because for encapsulation we are just doing it to make it hide from the user, and here in abstraction we hide because we hide the things which are making the app slower, or which are making the things which are making the app slower. We hide it just for this purpose, not.
Can you give me some example in the Flutter itself? How the Flutter itself is using some kind of abstraction?
So if we are, for example, we are initializing a class and then we are creating a method inside it, what we can do is to implement, instead of implementing it, if we can use directly the class, that decreasing the complexity of the code. And that's how it works. So we don't want that extra implementation part. We can just directly use the class or that function in the parent class. That of course decreases the complexity and that hides the other part of the code which shows on the code. That's how abstraction.
No, I mean in the Flutter framework itself. Give me some example that you make use of the abstraction. So you use a Flutter, right? So widgets everywhere. So give me some example from the Flutter framework itself.
Abstraction can using abstract classes. For example, we are creating first we are creating an abstract class. Then we are trying to.
No, I mean in the Flutter itself. I don't mean that you create and implement abstraction yourself. I mean how the Flutter is using the abstraction.
Flutter is okay.
Since Flutter is based on the OOP as well, right? So how it is making use of that particular abstraction, you think? Just now we saw about the inheritance and then the polymorphism, right? So how about the abstraction?
I don't know exactly, but that extend part that we use with the stateful widget, that can also come under abstraction because we are trying to extend, but then we can directly use the methods of the class also. So that's how already the thing working.
What about the encapsulation?
Encapsulation is basically hiding things which are not necessary to be shown. The working part which is not necessary, or the logic which needs not to be shown directly can be wrapped or like enveloped. That's encapsulation.
So how do you make use of how do you create encapsulation in Dart?
Just we can create a class. We create a class, then we call make a method inside it, and then we can use that method directly without showing the working of what the method is doing. For example, we create a class, and then inside a method that is doing some kind of calculation. Then to get the output, we can just directly use the method. We don't show that calculation part to the user. We just show the answer. Yes. I don't know I'm able to make it understand what exactly or not, but I have to put in that output. So if you are making, for example, a account class, and inside that you are trying to check the balance, so it won't show the exact calculation part to the methods that are there inside the bank.
So how do you actually hide? How do you actually hide? What are the keywords or maybe you use some keywords, or maybe you use some kind of the special function, or how do you actually hide the thing? I know you want to hide the things, but how do you actually hide it? You create a method, and let's say you create a method sum, or you create a method of the calculate. But once you create that particular instance of that particular class, you can easily access that particular sum or the calculate method, right? So are you hiding something there? You are not hiding anything, right?
Yeah, we are not hiding.
So how do you hide it? So encapsulation means hiding things, but you are not hiding it.
We can use some kind of private variables to use. So that those private variables will show you just the part which is to be shown, and they won't show the, like, I don't know the exact working, but theoretically I know that we can use some private variables. Those private variables are initialized, and through those we can just show the last part, like just the answer, not the calculation. Don't exactly know the matter.
So in
How it
the
will
Flutter
create.
Dart and Flutter, how do you create a private or public variables or the public methods or the private methods? Do you know how do we create it?
I don't have idea about that for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the solid
If you want to,
principle?
yeah, if we are creating a, we can create methods, the public and private methods, just by initializing inside the private, we can make some methods inside the public, and then they are protected uh, methods also. So we can directly just give the keyword private, then we make private methods. Private ones are those which can be accessed by everyone. We give the permission for that, and public can be accessed by anyone, can be directly.
No, I mean I
That's all.
understand that private and the public, but I just need to know
Yeah.
how do you create it, right? So let's move on
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the next question, which is the let's say a solid principle. So have you ever worked with the solid principle?
The solid principle, and I don't have worked upon it, but I just know them theoretically that how, like, what are they for. So that part solid is they are used for production level apps when they are like ready to be released. We go through the principles and we define the app, and then they are released for that. That's how it works.
Do you know about the single responsibility?
Legal responsibility, something like a class should be. It was like a class should be affected by a single part inside a class. A single part, single reason, or single change to a class be affected. That's how it should work. It's kind of simple. I don't know how that works practically because I'm not working with production labs yet. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the.
So what is a dependency injection? Have you ever worked with dependency injection?
Dependency injection. I have heard of the term, but I don't know exactly what it is. Dependency injection. I don't know about it.
Okay. Have you worked with the CI/CD, continuous integration or continuous deployment?
Yes, yeah. I have worked with the CI/CD pipelines which are used for these when they are going to pack it inside a containers and releasing that. Then they are used.
So how does the continuous integration and continuous deployment work?
So the continuation CI/CD, these are basically used in pipelines. One is your integration part is used for testing, and the delivery part is or deploying part is used for releasing the app. So there are multiple tools that can use the CI. That CI part goes through a workflow, and then that, for example, it will test the code. It will verify the code, look for any and then others if they are there. Then we will move to the CD part, the deployment part, which is done from multiple organizations. For example, we have Kubernetes, we have Docker. For these purposes, we can use this. We can use those to put it in a container. In those, they are called images, and through those we can release them.
So which CI/CD have you used?
I have once used that Docker part for this, and I know about something about Kubernetes also.
No, I mean in the Flutter. How do you implement CI/CD? You cannot create a Docker image of the Flutter, right? For the deployment, you need to create the app that need to be deployed in the App Store.
Yeah. What after you're completing the app, you can have to create a Docker file for your Flutter app, whatever it is. Where you mention some kind of some like functionalities, what you want to do with the app, and then you put it, then you form an APK for that, build a Flutter app, and whatever APK is that, you run it, and then you put it on this Docker, and through that you push it.
So
That's
what
how
are the things of
it will
like you use to create the secure your application?
secure your application. So if we are using some kind of API, we can hide these particularly very securely to work on the security part. We can use some kind of reverse engineering part to protect it from the hackers or something, any unauthorized sources. For security, we can put Google just gave us some of the tools also to put some verification layers over that. After the trying and testing part, we can put it while creating the APK part. So yeah, these are some of the things we can do for security purposes.
Okay. Um,
Let's start with
so have you ever used the code obfuscation?
code of fiction. I have not worked with it, but I know that it is some kind of security method. It's something related to reverse engineering. People use it so that they can protect their app from unauthorized errors and things. What it does is it converts your code into it performs multiple operations on your code. It splits it, it encrypts it, and it performs multiple other operations in the code so that the code cannot be directly accessed even through the reverse engineering if you are trying to summarize that. That's how I think it works.
Just now you talk about the API key, protecting the API key, right? So how do you actually protect the API key in the Flutter application? Let's say you need to integrate some the API, and you have some the keys that need to be stored in the application. So how do you actually make more secure way of the adding the keys to your application?
So first to protect to keep the API private, first of all use the Dart and its native Dart code. Flutter and Dart provide us some of the Google basically provides some of the tools for so that it keeps it away from the reverse engineering part. For example, the app APK tool, it is something like that to uh, protect the key.
Have you ever used it practically?
Yeah.
Have you ever used it? Any of these?
Not this, not APK, this tool package, but I have used the APK key restrictions package because I am using some kind of authentication or some kind of API. For example, like I use Google Maps API and Firebase. In those, if you are using Google authentication, you know you need the SHA-1 and SHA-2 physics key. Those provide the restriction, the package level restriction, in which the API keys are kept and those are not those cannot directly be used, accessed, and that's how the protection to the users.
So in the Android we have the let's say ProGrad rules and then the R8, right? So have you ever used it, or do you know how does it actually work?
No, not for that place on that thing, I'm not used to not knowing that.
Okay. So what about the flavors? We can have multiple flavors of the application, right? So let's say a development flavor, production flavor, QA flavors, or you have a free flavors and some different kind of the flavors. So in Android and iOS, how do you actually create it? Do you have any idea, or have you ever worked with the flavors?
I haven't worked exactly, but flavors or something. For example, we are working on an app. If it's a production level app, it could be happen if multiple people are working upon it. Multiple people can work on different operating systems, different versions, different code bases. So if you want at the end to be it on the same code base, we use that different flavors option. So flavors is basically different people are working on different things, different styles. They are compiled at once for the release of that. For example, yeah, this we have Dart and some staging flavors. I don't exactly know how they work, but yeah, they're used by Firebase to get access. That's all.
Okay. So in the iOS we have the IPA file, right? So let's say if you want to add some permission, let's say a camera permission to the iOS app. So how do you add that particular permission?
For you want to add the iOS permission just for that, like just for iOS.
Yeah. So let's say you want to integrate some camera feature that need to access the camera, right? But for that you need a permission. Without a permission, you cannot access the camera in Android as well as the iOS. So in the iOS part, how do you actually? Have you ever worked with the iOS build, or you just work
The
with
iOS
the?
build, yeah, till now I have just worked with the Android build, but for the iOS build, I know there are runner files inside the iOS build part. Inside those runner files, yeah, through this XML code, you can add permission. For example, like in Android, we have Android manifest file, there we add permission. That's same as in this iOS build file, we can take these runner files. Inside this, we can put different lines for multiple permissions that we want to take it from the user, and that's how we get to it.
So in the Android, you just mentioned about the manifest file. So what does actually the manifest file do?
The manifest file is, yeah, that's to take permission. For example, if we using geolocation guidance, for that we need location permission, release permission, or maybe we want mobile data permission, or we want this location permission, mobile microphone or camera, whatever permissions we are required. We put those in that Android manifest file, so that whenever your app starts, it will ask for that particular permission which is used by.
Okay, so in the Android part, what is the let's say a Gradle? The Android use a Gradle, right? So what actually is a Gradle, or why does it use a Gradle in the Android?
Gradle is used just by the Android part for the whole process, like building, testing, and deploying part. So we have different Gradle files. I don't exactly know how the Gradle works or what's the role of Gradle in that, but yeah, they help in the different stages of a production level app. For example, building part, they have different use for the testing, for the deploying, they have different use, and they have particular files. For example, the build.gradle file we have in that Android folder. So it uses dependencies and repositories for the app configuration part. That's how Gradle is used.
So what is the source set in the Android?
What is the
Source set.
source set?
Mm.
Not aware of that source set. Source settings or source settings.
Okay. So in the Flutter, what are the state management solution you have actually used?
So I have used provider for some time. I used river pod also. Then I use block. Now for like around 4 to 5 months I've been using block, and that's the best I have used till now. And the Flutter, which has the basic one, the Flutter has the set script, which is a new time optimization. Yeah, these are the ones that I have.
Okay, so in the Flutter block, what is a qubit then?
Qubit is a small part of a block through which you can create states, and you can create events, and in return you can get states based on the events into the of the app. You can whatever states are there, or whatever events are there in the app. That's how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
On a base level, they are different. Qubit is different from the block, but it is provided by the block package itself. So it is also kind of state management tool only. It uses the combination of Flutter block patterns to keep the state changes.
So what
like
is
admitting the states and whatever.
in the block? What is the event?
Event is any kind of action function which is being triggered by the user in the app. So if someone presses the button, it will trigger an event. It will trigger a function or an event. Corresponding to that event, a state is linked which will be passed to the app UI. For example, a button is clicked or a form will be signed in or a pop-up will open. So that's how those events work.
Okay, I think that's all for this interview. We spent a lot of
Okay,
time on it. I think it's we spent more than 1 hour here.